In the previous video, we have seen autowiring in action with a fairly simple command line weather app. We had two main classes, weather command and weather service. The weather service class was autowired for us thanks to Symfony. Now, we are going to make things a little bit more sophisticated by introducing a second weather service. So we are going to have two weather services that are tapping to different APIs, and those two services are going to implement an interface. So our command will be dependent on an interface rather than those two services. We will see in this video how to autowire those two services and how we are going to use expression language in services.yaml to conditionally autowire one of those two services to our command. So the goal of this video is to pass from version 1 over here to version 2 and see how autowiring will evolve. So let's get started. This is our GitHub repo. It has two branches, V1 and V2. V1 corresponds to the first part of our video, which we already have done, and V2 will be our target. So we are going to check out V1, start from V1 and put as a target V2. The first step would be to check out the code. So all the instructions are available here in the README. So the first step would be to clone the project. We're going to clone that in a terminal. So git clone and the project URL. This will create for us a folder named weather autowiring. So we are going to cd to that folder, and then we need to install dependencies, of course. So composer var install, and here we have all of our dependencies available and we are ready to start coding. So let's get started. The next step would be to open the project with PHP Store or whatever IDE that you use. So we have this V1 over here available. It has in the SRC a command for getting the weather, and then in the services we have a single service which is weather service, which will get the weather for us. We also had in services.yaml the definition of our weather service, defining two arguments which are days and temperature unit, because they are of type scalar and Symfony won't autowire that for us. So Symfony is auto-wiring the HTTP client for us because it knows how to create this instance, but those two values, days and temperature unit, it can't do that for us. So we are defining them explicitly here in services.yaml. So let's see how our project will evolve from version 1 to version 2. In version 1, we had a weather command that is going to call a get weather on a weather service. And this weather service is doing HTTP requests to our external API, which is api.openmeteo.com. In the second version, we are going to have two weather services. The one, I have put them in different colors for you. The blue one is our old weather service in V1. It is still doing HTTP requests to api.openmeteo.com. We have just renamed the service so that it reflects the API name. And the second service is tomorrow weather service, which is doing HTTP calls to api.tomorrow.io. So in V2 we have two weather services, and those weather services are implementing an interface which is weather service interface, which contains a get weather methods that takes latitude and longitude as arguments. And our weather command is going to depend on this interface rather than the implementation, which are those two services. And we are going to call get weather inside the execute of our weather command. So we are going to see how autowiring will react to this change and how we will be able to autowire those services in Symfony. The ultimate goal is to be able to decide on an environment variable which service we are going to use. Let's say that we want to ship this solution to different clients, and each client will prefer a weather provider. So some clients will want Tomorrow.io and others will want OpenMeteo. The goal is to ship the same code and to be able to specify in an environment variable which weather service we are going to use. So if we put in an environment variable WP, which stands for weather provider equals Tomorrow.io, we are going to use this weather service over here, so this API. And if we put WP equals OpenMeteo, we are going to use this weather service over here, so we are going to use this API. So let's get back to PHP Store and see how we can achieve that. Let's change our service name from weather service to OpenMeteo weather service. I'm going to refactor this class over here, rename it to OpenMeteo weather service. And what this will do is it will change the file name. It will rename the file name to openmeteorweatherservice.php, and it will also change all the occurrences of this class over here from weather service to openmeteorweatherservice. In weather command, for example, we are calling in the constructor an instance of weather service previously, so it will change to openmeteorweatherservice. So I will hit OK, and I will test my code whether if it's working or no. So I'm going to execute php bean console app weather, and then I'm going to give a latitude and longitude and see if that is going to work. No, it's not working because we have an invalid service class app service weather service. Why? Because in services.yaml we are still declaring weather service instead of open meteor weather service. So let's change this to open meteor weather service and see if our code will work again. Now let's retry again, and it is working. So the renaming thing is okay. Next, we have to update the getWeather method of openmeteorweatherservice. Why? Because for now we are returning a response specific to openmeteor API, which is not good, because in the weather command display forecast function we are taking that response and iterating over it. But the problem is that if we introduce a second API, we won't have the same structure. We won't have those values over here, and we will not iterate over that. One solution is to make a lot of if else's over here, but that's not good. So we are going to have a common response from the getWeather method and then iterate over that response. So all services have to return a common response, and then the weather command knows how to display that response. So this function over here will be replaced by this code over here. The first part, all this part over here is the same basically, and then we are adding a new layer here to adapt the response, so each service knows because each service is adapting its response, and this is the layer that will adapt the response for openmeteor. The response will be in this format. We will be having as key the date concerned with the forecast, and then the value for this key would be an array containing the mean temperature and the max temperature. So the keys will be mean and max. So this is the format that we are going to return for the getWeather from openmeteorweatherservice. Now we have to adapt in weather command the display forecast function, because it depends on the response of getWeather. So here we will take response instead of the value of response daily, and then the display forecast will be adapted, and it will take, so we are going to change all this and then put this instead. So as we said, the forecast will be taking the return of getWeather, which is an array that will be containing the date as key and then the temperature mean and max as values. So we are going to for each on this forecast and then fill in a table with the day and temperature mean and temperature max as values, and for the headers of the table we are going to have day, temperature mean and temperature max. So now we should be okay to test our code again and see if those changes have introduced errors, or we are good to continue coding. So let's test again our command, and yes, up to now we have done the blue part. We have renamed weather service into openmeteorweatherservice, adapted our getWeather method, and then adapted our weather command as well, so that it accepts the generic return from the getWeather method. What remains is this interface in the middle. So we are going to create this interface, make our openmeteorweather implements this interface, and make our weather command depends on the interface rather than on the implementation. So let's go to PHP Storm. We are going to make our openmeteorweatherservice implements weather service interface, which does not exist yet, so we are going to create it. I'm going to create this class over here, which is named weather service interface. It is of type interface, so I'm going to simply create this with PHP Storm, and then within this interface I'm going to have getWeather method. I'm going to copy it from the service itself, so I don't have to retype the whole thing. So we are going to have one method, which is getWeather. It takes latitude and longitude of type float as parameters, and it returns an array. Now we have openmeteorweatherservice implements our interface. Remains changing this value over here or in the weather command. Instead of injecting a service of type OpenMeteor weather service, I'm going to inject a service of type weather service interface. And now we can test our code and see if we are going to get the weather display working or we are going to have an error. So let's test again, and it is working, which is interesting. Why? Because we haven't told Symfony how to get an instance of weather service interface. And if we go to services.yaml, we will see no mention of this interface over here. We only have the definition of our OpenMeteor weather service. So how did Symfony know that it has to create an instance of OpenMeteor weather service and pass it here as an instance of weather service interface? Simply because we have a single service implementing weather service interface. If we have two services, we would have an error saying that there is more than one service implementing this interface. You have to choose as a developer which service I should inject for you, which is what we are going to see next when we will add a second service. So Symfony is powerful enough to know that if you want an instance of this interface over here and there is only one service, which is in our case over here OpenMeteor weather service, which implements this interface, it will simply create that service and pass it over here without the need of manually configuring it in services.yaml. Now let's move to the second case where we have multiple services implementing the same interface and retest our command to see what would be the reaction of Symfony and how we are going to auto-wire one of those two services. So in service, we are going to create a new class. It's going to be a PHP class. Let's name it tomorrow weather service, because we are going to request the tomorrow.io API, and we have to implement over here weather service interface. Therefore we have to override the getWeather method, so we need to return an array over here. We are going to use HTTP client as well to request the tomorrow.io API, so we have to define that in the constructor. So in our constructor we are going to define the need of an HTTP client, and then let's import that. And then in the getWeather method, we are simply doing a get request, a get HTTP request to api.tomorrow.io, and then passing in the latitude and longitude along with other parameters needed for the API to work. Then we are for eaching on the response and adapting it, as we said, to our generic format, which is the date as key. So we're creating a date time here and formatting into year, month, day, and then as value we have this table over here containing mean and max temperature. So now we have defined a second service that can be used as a weather forecast. Now let's see if our command will still be working after introducing this second service over here. So let's re-execute again our command, and we have an error. The error message says that we cannot auto-wire our weather service interface. Why? Because we have two instances. Symfony even suggests for us the solution, which is aliasing this interface to one of our two services, which are OpenMeteor weather service or tomorrow weather service. So to alias that, we have just to say here in our services.yaml, we have to create a service that has the same namespace as our interface, which is app service and then weather service interface, and then we have to reference either OpenMeteor weather service or our second service, which is tomorrow weather service. To reference a service, we have to precede it with the @ annotation. So let's take this service, for example, over here and see if it is going to work. Now we have aliased our interface, and Symfony should not give us an error for now, because it knows that whenever we have a weather service interface, we have to use this service over here, which is OpenMeteor weather service. So let's try it again, and it is working. Let's say now that we want to use the second service, which is tomorrow weather service. So we have just to replace OpenMeteor weather service with tomorrow weather service, and it should be working as well. Yeah, to be more sure about the service being used, we are going to log the class name of our weather service in the weather command, specifically in the execute method. Just before calling the get weather, we are going to log the class name of our weather service. And to be able to log that in a log file, we need the logger dependency, of course, and this dependency can be injected either through the constructor, like we are injecting the weather service interface over here, or it can be injected also with a setter. And the interesting thing about injecting through a setter is that Symfony gives us the possibility to auto wire this dependency by adding the required attribute just above the setter. So we are going to inject the logger with a setter. So let's define a setter here for our logger, public function set logger, and then we are going to have a logger interface, and let's name the argument logger, and then we are going to define a property. This logger equals logger, and then we are going to define a property here of type logger interface, and let's name it logger. So if you want Symfony to automatically inject a logger for us through this setter, you just have to add the required attribute over here, and Symfony will do that automatically for us. As I mentioned in their documentation, they say autowiring will automatically call any method with the required attribute above it, autowiring each argument. So we are sure that Symfony will autowire that for us, and we can use this instance safely in all of our code. So here in the execute method, we are going to log, so this logger, and then let's debug it. Service being used is, and then let's add get class of this ws to see which class we are using for our service. Now, to be able to see the log, we need to install the monologue component of Symfony. So we have to do that with composer require Symfony and monologue bundle. Otherwise we are not going to see any log. And then let's split our display here into two command lines and to see the log in real time. So here on the right hand, we are going to tail in real time var log and dev.log, and here on the left hand side we are going to execute our command line, and here above we are going to open services.yaml to see which service we have defined here as alias. So now we have defined tomorrow weather service as alias for weather service interface. So in the log, when executing this command over here, we should see that we are using tomorrow weather service. So let's hit enter, and service being used is app service tomorrow weather service, which is exactly what we expected. Now let's change this to open Meteo weather service. So we are switching the pointer basically, or the alias, and re-execute again our command. And now service being used is app service open Meteo weather service. So as we expected, we have this pointer over here, we have this alias over here that is switching the instance being used from one service to another. Let's make this more interesting, and instead of choosing statically which instance we want to have as alias for weather service interface, we are going to define that in an environment variable called WP, which stands for weather provider. So if you have WP equals tomorrow IO, we are going to use tomorrow weather service. Otherwise, we are going to fall back to open Meteo weather service. So to choose this, we are going to use kind of if-else condition, which is available for us in services.yaml thanks to Symfony's expression component. So in services.yaml, we can auto-wire conditionally services thanks to the expression language. We are going to do so in our weather command. So we are going to redefine our weather command as a service, and then in the arguments section we are going to define our WS, which is our weather service, which will be equals to this expression over here. which says in a short that we want to check on our environment variable WP. If it's equals tomorrow IO, I'm going to return a service of ID app service tomorrow weather service. Otherwise, I'm going to return a service of ID app service open meteor weather service. So let's test this code over here. So on the right hand side, I have the output of my log, and on the right hand side I will be executing my command. Let's visualize the content of WP. For now I'm having tomorrow IO, so I should be seeing in the log a tomorrow weather service being logged. So let's go and check that, and it does not work. Why? We are having an error here saying that this expression over here cannot be used without the expression language component. So our project does not have the expression language component yet, so we need to install it. And to install that, we have just to execute composer var require Symfony expression language, and we will let composer install that for us. So now that we have the component, we should be okay. Let's clear out the log on the right and see if we are going to have tomorrow weather service, and yes, it is displayed. So service being used is app service tomorrow weather service. Now let's change this to open weather API, or any value for that matters, because in the check here in the services.yaml, if you don't have tomorrow IO, we are going to fall back to open meteor. So let's define for example here open meteor, save that and re-execute our command again, and we should see that we are using now app service open meteor weather service. So thanks to this expression over here, we were able to conditionally auto-wire services, and that's thanks to Symfony's expression language. That's a pretty cool feature of Symfony. Thank you guys for watching. I will be posting questions at the end of this video. Feel free to answer them in the comments section. Bye bye.